I'm Francis Dearnley, and this is Ukraine, the latest. Today, as the United States holds secret talks with separate Ukrainian and Russian delegations, we unpack the emerging 19-point peace plan and react live on air to breaking reports Ukraine has agreed to the framework of a potential deal. We then gauge the mood in Europe's capitals. Is this a moment of quiet strategy and resolution, or rising panic as the diplomatic landscape shifts beneath their feet?
Bravery takes you through the most unimaginable hardships to finally reward you with victory.
Russia does not want peace.
Erstens, wir verteidigen mit unserer Hilfe für die Ukraine auch unsere Freiheit und unsere europäischen Werte.
If I'm president, I will have that war settled in one day, 24 hours.
We are with you, not just today or tomorrow, but for 100 years.
Nous ne pouvons pas, comme Européens, laisser gagner la Russie en Ukraine.
Nobody's going to break us. We're strong. We're Ukrainians.
It's Tuesday, the 25th of November, 3 years and 276 days since the full-scale invasion began. And today, I'm joined by the Telegraph's Associate Editor for Defence, Dominic Nicholls, our Brussels correspondent, Joe Barnes, and our Berlin correspondent, James Rothwell, dialling in from Belgium and Berlin, respectively. But first, the key developments of the past 24 hours. First, there was the 28-point US-Russia plan. Then there was Europe's counterplan, which was either 28 points, 27 or 24, depending on which version you read. A plan firmly rejected by Moscow after our broadcast yesterday. Now you join us with a 19-point plan. Its details secret, but which form the basis of a new round of talks between the Ukrainians and the Americans today, and later the Americans and the Russians, no longer in Switzerland, but in the United Arab Emirates. We don't know whether any of the European draft has made its way into these new 19 points, though our friends at the Financial Times, from an interview with the Ukrainian negotiation team, say that the new 19-point peace deal is more favourable to Kyiv than the earlier framework, but leaves the most politically sensitive elements, including territorial issues and relations between NATO, Russia and the US, to be decided by the country's presidents. US Army Secretary Dan Driscoll, an ally of J.D. Vance, more on that in a moment, is in Abu Dhabi and is currently talking to Ukraine's military intelligence chief, General Budanov. A formidable figure, to put it mildly, as Dom and I can attest from our meeting with him. President Zelensky sounded cautiously optimistic about the shift in tone in his address to the nation last night, saying he was in constant contact with his negotiators. The Telegraph and others report that direct talks between Zelensky and President Trump could happen as early as this week, though a European source familiar with the talks said much work was still to be done on the plan and erred on the side of caution because of the lack of Russian agreement. And that is another key question. What points, if any, have been removed for the new Ukraine-US framework, and will they immediately spark a rejection from the Kremlin? Axios have published a new account of the events of recent days, which, if true, redraws the timeline to one previously understood. They claim Zelensky listened on speakerphone a whole week ago as Trump's advisors Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner read line by line from the 28-point plan. A plan put together after Kushner and Witkoff pivoted in late October from Gaza to Ukraine. To quote the piece, the pair wanted to repeat their approach from the Middle East, draft a plan, put it on the table, and figure out how to get both sides to agree. 3 days later, Witkoff and Kushner met Putin's envoy Dmitriev for dinner in Miami, and again for several hours on Sunday. The result of the meetings with Dmitriev was the initial draft for what became the 28-point US plan. Now that conflicts with the claims we reported yesterday that a wholly Russian-drafted 30-point plan was circulating as far back as 6 months ago. So it's been a while since I've said this, perhaps one for future historians. Axios also quotes an official as saying Secretary of State Marco Rubio was read in every step of the way, which contradicts much of the reporting from the past 72 hours, suggesting Rubio was kept in the dark from the plan and may even have been seeking to undo it behind closed doors. That reading has Vice President J.D. Vance as the real architect of this latest push, and evidence can be found for that in the fact that Army Secretary Driscoll is a Yale Law classmate of his, apparently asked by Vance to completely reshift the focus of his planned meetings in Kyiv from defence tech to peace negotiations. Indeed, some are reading this as a power grab from Vance to wound his future rival for the Republican ticket, Marco Rubio. Certainly, Vance is on the attack today, criticising senior Republicans in Congress, such as Mitch McConnell, for their criticism of the 28-point plan, which they see as rewarding the Russians for the war. In a post on X, Vance listed all the domestic issues he said our administration is working hard on addressing. But you know what really fires up the Beltway GOP? Not any of the above. Instead, the political class is really angry that the Trump administration may finally bring a 4-year conflict in Eastern Europe to a close. I'm not even talking about the substance of their views. Much of what these people have said about the Ukraine war has been proven wrong, but whatever. We can agree to disagree. But the level of passion over this one issue when your own country has serious problems is bonkers. It disgusts me. Show some passion for your own country. So seemingly no recognition there from Mr. Vance that if Moscow is seen to be rewarded, that might make the world a far more dangerous place, including for American citizens. Now, it's not surprising Vance is criticising Congress. He's desperate to try and get something agreed without congressional scrutiny or before momentum can swing back against the deal. It's worth underscoring recent Republican polling is extremely critical of the plan. This is an issue the administration wants sewn up, as their hand may weaken over time and as more voices speak out against it. It could also become an issue that angry Republicans in Congress weaponize to criticize the White House. And there's already some evidence of that. Here's one particularly angry senior House Republican quoted in the media yesterday. This entire White House team has treated all members like garbage. All. The arrogance of this White House is off-putting to members who are run roughshod and threatened. They don't even allow little wins, like announcing small grants or even responding from agencies. Not even the high profile, the regular rank and file random members are more upset than ever. Members know they're going into the minority after the midterms. Nonetheless, Trump himself seems to be in a bullish mood, saying yesterday something good just may be happening in the talks. He also spoke to China's President Xi, apparently urging all parties in the conflict to reduce differences, almost certainly an attempt to get Beijing to put pressure on their allies in Moscow. We still don't know whether the White House would carry out its threat of cutting off military support and intelligence to Ukraine if they don't agree to a plan by Thursday, though its press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, said yesterday the US is still sending or selling a big amount of weapons to NATO. We cannot do that forever. Now, if that came to pass, that the Trump administration would consider ending the Pearl Initiative, by which Europe purchases weapons from the US for Ukraine, that it would mark a potentially fatal misstep from the Europeans in their strategy so far, who've adopted one of giving in to Trump's demands on military spending, tariffs, digital deregulation, multinational taxation and energy supplies to try and keep him sweet, only for him to abandon them anyway. By that reading, perhaps Europe should have been more worried about appeasing Trump than appeasing Putin. It remains to be seen whether the European calculation to use the US 28 points as a starting point for discussion, rather than rejecting it outright, was a wise one. We should hear more from the coalition of the willing today after their meetings, which also include the Australians. It bears repeating, the implications of this plan, if agreed, would go far beyond Europe. The EU's top diplomat, Kaja Kallas, has firmly rejected the plans that Russia would be welcomed back to the world stage by returning to the G8. And the heads of well over a dozen chairs of foreign affairs committees across Europe have published a joint statement which features some pretty punchy quotes. They say Russia's war of aggression and the peace that follows will shape European security for generations and affect the existential interests of all Europeans. Nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine, and nothing about Europe without Europe. Ukraine's security guarantees must be real, based on legally binding commitments and reinforced by reassurance forces in Ukraine and the capabilities necessary to deter future aggression. But, as we've said countless times, it all boils down to just how much leverage and courage Europe has. This is its moment, as we always thought it ultimately would be. The decisions made in European capitals now may shape all of our futures. But before we go to Brussels and Berlin with Joe and James, it's worth reflecting on whether Russia has stopped its bombardments on civilians while these talks are going on. Have they, Dom?
No. Hello, Francis. Hello, everyone. It will not surprise you to hear that they have not. Tragically, as expected, given all the diplomatic manoeuvring, Russia launched a very large-scale attack last night, centred on Kyiv and the wider Kyiv Oblast, but with strikes also across Ukraine. Critical energy infrastructure and residential areas were hit with Shahed drones and Kinzhal ballistic missiles. Kyiv Mayor Vitaly Klitschko said at least 7 people were killed, 14 others injured in the city. Ukraine's energy minister said a massive combined attack on energy infrastructure had occurred, striking energy facilities in Kyiv, Odessa, Chernihiv, Dnipropetrovsk and Kharkiv Oblasts. I saw reports actually early evening yesterday, our time, so Ukraine's a couple of hours ahead of us, that reported a number of MiG-31 bombers, Russian bombers, had been reported taking off from Russian airfields. That triggered a nationwide ballistic missile alert. The MiG-31s are some of the aircraft that fired the Kinzhal ballistic missile. President Zelensky said this morning that Dnipro, Kharkiv, Chernihiv and Cherkasy regions were hit. He said the primary targets were the energy sector and everything that keeps normal life going. Now, during that attack, at least 2 drones entered Romanian airspace. Romania's Ministry of National Defence said today 2 German Eurofighter Typhoon aircraft were scrambled to intercept the drones around 6:30 a.m. local time this morning in Tulcea County. That's just, it's in the east of Romania. It's on the Black Sea, borders Ukraine. Ukraine's to the north, across the Danube River. 2 F-16s also scrambled just to the northwest in Galați County an hour later. Romania's MOD said the F-16s had radar contact with a drone around 7:50 a.m. this morning. They didn't give any further details, actually, except they're saying there were no injuries or damage. I don't think they shot the drones down. We would have heard otherwise. We don't know if the drones landed harmlessly or if they were just shepherded out of Romanian airspace. But on the back of that, Moldova said they also had drones land in their location. Moldovan police reported this morning that a drone marked with a very prominent Z symbol, symbolic of the Russian military, fell on a border guards building and the border area near Ukraine. It didn't explode. There's an amazing photo of it just stuck on the roof. There was a military explosive team working at the site this morning to make it safe. Onto the ground in Ukraine, let's go to the east and Pokrovsk. And geolocated footage published yesterday and cited by the Institute for the Study of War shows Ukrainian forces have maintained positions in northwest Pokrovsk. Those are areas that Russian sources had previously claimed to be held by Moscow's troops. Additional footage from yesterday shows Ukrainian forces patrolling in northern Pokrovsk, in areas where Russian forces had previously infiltrated. And a Ukrainian assault regiment in the city said that central Pokrovsk had been cleared of Russian forces. Now, Institute for the Study of War say Ukrainian efforts to hit Russian logistic lines into the city with drones and the disjointed nature of Russian infiltration tactics likely continue to hinder Russia's efforts to mass troops necessary to complete the seizure of the city. Of course, as I always say, it is very, very difficult to get accurate information out in a timely manner. So we have to take all this into account. One Ukrainian military source said that Ukraine's drones had cut Russian logistics to 90% of Moscow's assault groups within the city, slowing the pace of the advance. That source also added that Russian forces in the city, which are thought to number about 500 people, are relatively uncoordinated and sometimes commit friendly fire incidents. As we said before, in an urban space, if you see movement somewhere, do you open fire? Do you not? Is it your guys? Is it theirs? Etc., etc. So very, very confusing. It's thought the poor weather conditions continue to favour Russia by allowing them to accumulate forces and push into the city from that open flank to the south and try to re-enter areas that Ukrainian forces had previously cleared. Still a very, very hard fight there in Pokrovsk. Into Russia now, coupled from there, Ukrainian drones attacked the Russian regions of Krasnodar Krai and Rostov Oblast last night. They're both to the east of Ukraine. So first in Taganrog, that's a city right in the northeast corner of the Sea of Azov, about 30 kilometres up the coast from the Ukrainian border. So that's in Rostov Oblast. drones hit the Beriev Aircraft Company. Now, that produces Russian military aircraft, including the A-50 AWACS, the Airborne Warning and Control System plane, sometimes called a spy plane. It provides air traffic control in the sky, effectively. It's not got cameras and other spy kit on it, but it enables a degree of command and control to be enacted over your own assets. So the A-50 was maintained there, and also the big Tupolev 95 bombers, the Tu-95 bombers, are said to be maintained there as well. A number of images online you'll find of a large fire breaking out on a runway near the facility. Locals also reported that a plane was burning on the premises. Now, from what I've seen elsewhere, that is reported to be an A-60, an experimental plane, basically, an airborne laser laboratory aircraft, only 2 of which were said to have been built. Reports I've seen of the A-60 says it hasn't actually moved for a few years, so I don't know if it's in service or whether or not it's being modified, whether it was an A-50, but an aircraft seems to have been hit there. Then in Novorossiysk, we've seen before down the coast on the Black Sea, Russian officials and media reported another heavy drone assault there. Local governor Veniamin Kondratev said the region was subjected to one of the longest and most massive attacks of the full-scale war so far, from the Russian perspective. He said 6 people were injured and at least 20 homes damaged in the strikes there. There's amazing imagery you'll find online of the attack on Novorossiysk. You on the receiving end of a Ukrainian missile, basically. So you see the bright spot in the sky, and then it's only in the last couple of seconds that this thing just suddenly speeds up. Obviously, it's going at the same speed, but when it comes towards you, it's very, very dramatic footage. You'll find that online. Now, Ukraine's General Staff said units of the rocket forces and artillery, in coordination with the Special Ops Forces, Naval Coastal Missile Units and the Unmanned Systems Forces, had conducted these strikes using the BARS UAVs, drones, uninhabited air vehicles, and Neptune cruise missiles. They said they'd hit the Beriev aviation plant and the nearby Molnia drone production facility in Taganrog, which likely disrupted the A-50s and the possible A-60 experimental aircraft. Ukraine's defence forces said the strike in Novorossiysk hit the Sheshkaris oil terminal and the Tuapse oil refinery that has been attacked before. They say preliminary reports show damage to oil loading equipment and an S-400 air defence system launcher in Novorossiysk. That's us up to date, Francis.
Well, thanks very much, Dom. Let's go to Berlin and Brussels now, starting with the latter. Joe Barnes, our Brussels correspondent. I know it's been a very, very busy few days for you. First of all, just want to gauge your sense of the mood music in Brussels at the moment. Are they scrambling? Where are we?
To say they weren't ready is probably a bit of an understatement, but were they caught off guard and have they been scrambling like mad, and are they in a bit of a panic and a daze? Yes, they are.
And how is that being registered, Joe? I mean, are you getting WhatsApp messages from your contacts who are saying, by God, what the hell is going on? Or using more diplomatic language than that? Or is it palpable in the conversations that you can sense or hear are happening between the European leaders? I'm just interested in the sense of panic, if that's the word that we should be using here.
Panic, concern, terrified, yes. I think everyone in Europe realises that what happens in Ukraine is important for their own security and safety. And also, we've got to remember the plan. We've not seen the 19-point plan, but the 28-point plan, the European-Ukrainian versions, ask a lot of the EU in terms of whether it be sanctions, letting Ukraine into the EU. And let's cast our mind back to a letter that was sent from Vladimir Putin to Joe Biden in 2021. A version also got sent to Jens Stoltenberg, NATO's then Secretary General, basically suggesting that to stop me invading Ukraine, NATO could agree to stop expanding, to stop allowing new members in, but it could also pull back to its pre-97 borders, or its forces to pre-97 force posture. So that would essentially mean pulling out the Baltics, pulling out of Poland, basically removing all of its presence from the eastern flank, which is the direct border with Russia. So yeah, there's lots being asked. So yeah, lots of panic, lots of concern, and also lots of people who have just invested a hell of a lot of time and effort into European support for Ukraine are now in a really dark and gloomy place. Like people sort of saying, oh yeah, like the mood is really depressing. And these aren't, and what's interesting here, and it strikes me, because it's also, I guess it feels the same for us, is we've spent so much time reporting on Ukraine's cause, and it does feel like a bad moment, because Zelensky is left with this decision where does he take a gamble, make the horrible decision between siding with the Donald Trump strategy and essentially surrendering land to Russia that Russia doesn't control the entirety of the Donbass, or does he take that gamble? Does he take that, is it a Hail Mary almost, decision to say, no, Donald, I don't like what you're doing. I'm going to carry on defending my country. So be it if you pull support. And then he's basically relying on the Europeans. Are they strong enough to then actually continue supporting Ukraine for as long as it takes? And I think that's one of the questions which a lot of people are searching for in Brussels right now and in the wider Europe. Is there a leader who is going to emerge from this and actually grab the process by the scruff of its neck from a European standpoint and say, no, Ukraine, we're going to back you. We're not going to allow this deal which sort of demands your capitulation. We are actually with you for as long as it takes. And I don't think anyone... So someone I was speaking to today was sort of muting that Emmanuel Macron, who has been quite front-footed. I think he mentioned in an interview with RTL, a French broadcaster, he said, we can't allow a Ukrainian capitulation, in not exactly those words. But so people are suggesting, is Macron the man to actually sort of really corral Europe together and actually get it moving and sort of do something? Keir Starmer has been fairly quiet on this front. He's the language that's been released to the press from him or via his spokesman has all been quite timid. So is he the man? Probably not. So yeah, Europe's looking for a leader and yeah, a bit panicked, I guess.
Well, thanks, Joe. Just one very brief question before I bring in James in Berlin. Has this, in your view, shifted the conversation about the unfreezing of Russian assets at that crucial meeting in December?
So, yeah, there was a video call / meeting of the EU's member states yesterday. Probably a dozen or so were in Africa, where the EU was holding an EU-AU summit, the AU being African Union. Ursula von der Leyen and other EU sort of figureheads and leaders said, we've got to really support Ukraine through this. We've got to maintain our support. We've got to support the idea that borders can't be moved by force. We've got to support the idea that Ukraine is basically determines its own fate in terms of whether it joins the EU, whether it joins NATO, whether it stations European troops in its country. But then they also said all of this shows that we have to really work hard and accelerate the work being done on this 140 billion euro proposal, which essentially funds Ukraine to the tune of that amount of money, guaranteed by frozen Russian assets. So essentially, if Russia at the end of the war doesn't pay back money to Ukrainian reparations, that then Ukraine can then pay back that loan, Europe will be able to take those frozen Russian assets to basically settle the bill. We know that Belgium has been blocking that, but has it brought a renewed set of urgency? There was meant to be a decision by December. All they've said is, let's try and meet that deadline. Let's not let it slip into next year. So as it stands, we don't know, but there are sort of murmurings, there is language on the need to get that deal done.
Well, thanks, Joe. Let's go to James now in Berlin. James, if you were to summarise in a word the mood in Berlin at the moment, what would it be?
Hello, Francis. Yes, the word I would use to describe the German reaction to that peace plan was panic. That it created a very, very strong counter-reaction in Berlin on Friday night. There was a sort of mixture of... this language might sound very strong, but I think it's appropriate to characterise the German reaction. It was a mixture of shock and disgust, really, at the substance of that plan. Norbert Röttgen, who's the CDU's foreign policy expert, the CDU being the centre-right ruling party of Germany, he said the plan was completely unsuitable. He described it as a Russian wish list for Ukraine's surrender. And he also said that the subsequent weakening of Ukraine internally and externally against Russian aggression was a key part of that peace plan. And in return, American business interests are to be served. So that's Norbert Röttgen, very senior foreign policy voice, if you like, in Friedrich Merz's CDU party, describing that plan as a wish list for Ukraine's surrender. Another senior CDU politician, Roderick Kiesewetter, arguably even more hawkish on Ukraine than the Chancellor, but still an important voice in this debate. He described it as the capitulation plan. It's a plan that's also been described as the Trump-Putin pact over the weekend by German politicians. And I believe there was also some quite pungent language from Jürgen Hart, who is the foreign policy spokesman for Mr. Merz's CDU party. And here it is, I've just found it actually. Jürgen Hart, CDU foreign policy spokesman. The territorial concessions, the weakening of the Ukrainian army, everything is designed to make the next phase of the war easier for the Kremlin. This is simply unacceptable for Europe and Germany. And I think it's that comment from Mr. Hart that really captures the German panic about the essence of this plan. Their concern is that it's not really a peace plan at all. It's a pause, reload and rearm plan. It's a plan that essentially lays the groundwork for simply another attempt at an invasion by Vladimir Putin, where the territory, as a result of the Trump peace plan, would be even more favorable to him. So the reaction was really, really strong. And I just want to sort of stress this point. It's quite unusual, frankly, for German politics to get this kind of pungent when they're talking about how much they dislike the sort of constituent parts of a plan like this. German politics has changed recently. It used to be an arena that was characterized by understatement under Angela Merkel. It has certainly become a bit more vivacious and bombastic under Friedrich Merz, who's got a bit of a populist streak. But this kind of language, I think, is quite unusual. And it, to me, came across as a really quite visceral reaction from the Germans in terms of how concerned they were about this. As Joe has already outlined, there was a lot of action over the weekend. That 28-point plan got sort of whittled down to a version that perhaps might be slightly more feasible going forward, although I note that the Russians, very, very flatly rejected it, or at least rejected what we understand to be the latest version, rejected that very strongly. And so I'll just make this last point. I think that the German sort of reaction to this is also beginning to realize that there's a risk that these decisions might get made without Europe. I mean, we've heard this refrain so much now. Nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. Nothing about Europe without Europe. Johann Wadephul, the German foreign minister, really stressed that latter point. Nothing about Europe without Europe at a speech he gave earlier today in Berlin. There is this fear that the wheels are already turning, that the car is taking off without Germany on board, and that the decisions that might be made in this pact are going to have incredibly long and far-reaching ramifications, not only for Ukraine, but also for European security. And I think that's why the German reaction was so visceral. And I think it speaks to a very significant, almost palpable atmosphere of fear and panic, basically, in a very, very senior EU member state about the direction of travel on this plan.
Thank you, James. And I wonder, is that panic being felt not just in the higher echelons of German society, but among the ordinary population as well? Because that's also pivotal here, is it not?
I think so. Germany's is going for a difficult phase of politics at the moment. You've got the far right AfD, often described as a Kremlin-friendly party, now second place in Germany, the de facto opposition, and that adds an additional layer of complexity to very, very robust, angry public discussions in Germany about European security. A significant part of the electorate, votes for a party, the AfD, which is very sympathetic towards the Russian worldview. It's also, by the way, a party that's got a very, very warm relationship with the Trump administration as well. And so, yes, I think that's part of the. I think that's part of the tension here. We've seen, or at least we saw on Friday, an element of megaphone diplomacy. Lots of German politicians sticking their heads above the trench and sort of totally kind of dismantling the key ingredients of this plan. It's a very, very difficult discussion for Germany to have. Nevertheless, this government under Friedrich Merz, very clearly has taken the view that the plan as it was outlined on Friday is just not going to work. That is why Germany has played its role in these sort of kind of frantic discussions really over the weekend on trying to get a slightly more palatable version put forward. Even then, it's been a little bit difficult to follow which elements of the new plan Germany is on board with and which elements it's not on board with. There was a lot of reporting, for example, over the weekend about Russia being allowed into the G8, but at the same time, Friedrich Merz was publicly in an interview really kind of rejecting that idea and saying that there wasn't any appetite in the G8 to have Russia back into the fold. Now, you could, of course, characterize that as a concession by Europe that's been made deeply reluctantly, something which it would much rather not do in order to show willingness. But nevertheless, it's been a very, very sort of fraught couple of days, and at times one almost feels like one is getting whiplash trying to keep up with it. Just in terms of how quickly the situation is moving. I'm looking at our live blog as we speak, actually, and just want to read out a post which has just come through, which is, our headline at the moment: Ukraine agrees to Trump's amended peace deal. Now, that's according to American officials. We've been here before, American officials saying Ukraine is on board, but is it? So it's moving really, really, really quickly. And that just brings me back to something else that Friedrich Merz said over the weekend. His key message at the EU-Africa summit in Angola was, this is going to take time. He really didn't seem to be that concerned about Donald Trump's Thursday deadline. He said that, significant progress on this agreement is not going to be made overnight, that this is going to be a long process. Sir Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, has said something quite similar actually this afternoon. The one thing I would say about the European perspective on this, or at least the German perspective, is I think there's still some hope in Europe that Thursday deadline doesn't actually apply, and that they can try to sort of, after the panic of the weekend, take a bit of a breather and go through the detail of this a little bit more methodically and try to come up with something that's more that Ukraine would be more amenable to, and that they would be more amenable to as well, in terms of the long-term European security picture. So there is that point worth stressing as well.
Well, thanks very much, James. As you say, that breaking story there, and Dom's just been looking into it. Dom, what's the latest on this?
Yeah, thanks, Francis. So, hi, James. So, CBS News are reporting, they say a US official has told CBS News the Ukraine's government have, quote, agreed to a peace deal brokered by the Trump administration. The American official and Ukraine's national security advisor, Rustem Umerov, said a common understanding on a proposal had been reached, with details still to be worked out. So, okay, let's pause.
Interesting wording.
Yeah, exactly. So, a peace deal, agreed to a peace deal, comma, a common understanding on a proposal has been reached. That ain't a peace deal to me, but as I've been saying all week, kick the can down the road, lads. Get through to Thursday, public holiday in the US. That's what we're working for here. So a common understanding on a proposal has been reached, and then with details still to be worked out. Well, if there's anything about peace deals, the devil is in the detail. So if there's details still to be worked out, that ain't a peace deal as far as I'm concerned. However, the US official told CBS News the Ukrainians have agreed to the peace deal. There are some minor details to be sorted, but once they have agreed to a peace deal, I don't think there is a signature on the dotted line yet. It says here there was no immediate reaction from Russia. So we are but possibly no further forward. However, just on it, CBS also reporting, and this is very interesting, speaking during a press briefing earlier today, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. This was a seeming rebuke, I think, to Dmitriev about the 28-point plan, the original Russia plan. Lavrov said that he appreciates US position, which is taking the initiative in resolving the Ukrainian conflict. But he said Moscow operates professionally, not leaking information before formal agreements are reached. That is an absolute rebuke to Dmitriev for leaking this thing to Axios and starting this whole thing. I mean, as we said before, that this Russian position that started this flurry of activity from last Thursday was so clever in many ways, but absolutely fundamentally undermined themselves in others. Now, I'll just quickly recap that. So very, very clever. They've sold this as a real estate deal to Steve Witkoff. New York real estate dude, knowing that will play well with Donald Trump, who is disinterested and disengaged. So he'll be attracted to kind of real estate deals. So Witkoff walks it in, bingo, off we go. Also, so Russia sees their moment of opportunity. Zelensky's weak with the whole corruption scandal. Now's the time to strike. Dmitriev leaks it to Axios, and off we go. And of course, one thing that the Russians are really nervous about is that the frozen Russian assets sitting in Belgium. So one of the points of their deal was to make that money contingent on, or said it will pay for reparations or rebuilding in Ukraine through US companies, and the US companies can profit from it, thereby making it directly in the US interest for that Russian asset lump not to be seized by Europe. So really, really clever by Russia there. However, they put the thing about denazification in the 28-point plan. And of course, Ukraine's not going to sign that, thereby sort of admitting, oh yeah, we used to be Nazis. So they shouldn't have put that point in there. It was absolutely stupid. And also the way it was framed, the whole thing about NATO and pushing a wedge between US, they didn't need to do that. So they fundamentally, they came out the blocks quickly, and they had a moment when they might have got this through, but it was so on the nose, so sniffy, that there was just this immediate reaction. So, what I've seen breaking at the moment, CBS saying that a deal has been done, but it's all still to be worked out.
Yeah, it seems like this is more of the framework being agreed. And as you say, if so, that's very, very canny by the Ukrainians. I think this is potentially a very interesting moment, putting pressure on Moscow to agree to something that they may not want to agree to at all. If these 19 points, if that is the basis for this, takes out crucial Moscow demands, which they felt they were in a strong hand to receive. Let's go then to our final thoughts now, starting with Joe Barnes. I imagine that you've also got some thoughts on this.
Well, let's start with the American language, because ABC News also reported something similar. The Ukrainians have agreed to the peace deal. The US officials said there are some minor details to be sorted out, but they have agreed to a peace deal. Well, that doesn't really change the situation as we knew it yesterday. But then also going back, Dom, you mentioned that phrase, I can't remember what point of the 28-point plan it was off the top of my head, but as if all Nazi elements in Ukraine will be eradicated. That is means a lot more to the Russians and to the whole context than just this imaginary Nazism that exists in Ukraine in the head of Vladimir Putin and his cronies, more henchmen, as I like to call them. That actually means further efforts to neuter Ukraine's ability to resist armed conflict, armed invasion in the future. Because two of the groups of people who are most branded as Nazis by Russia, they are Azov and the Third Assault Army Corps, as it now is. That is two of Ukraine's premier fighting forces that Russia would basically be able to disband if it was to sign up and agree to the term Nazi being put in a deal. It's not just about sort of airy-fairy accusations. It's actually, that would be rooted in hard and fast legalities for Russia to demand that, because you signed up to that means you have to shut Third Assault, it means you have to shut Azov, and that leaves Ukraine that much more weak.
Interesting. Well, thanks very much, Joe. You've got the final thoughts for today, James, on the developing story that we've just been talking about.
I think that our own Prime Minister has given a pretty clear indicator of what's actually just happened. I'm just seeing some quotes from the Prime Minister breaking now. He says, I suspect it won't be the whole of the agreement that needs to be reached. I'll have a look at the report and behind the headline, he says. It's a bit of a cliche, but I'm going to invoke it. I think let's wait and see. I think Dom is absolutely right to say that the devil is in the detail on these agreements. Precedent strongly suggests that this is just as much of a risk crashing and burning as previous attempts at getting an agreement have made. The rest of the afternoon, I think, is going to potentially be very sort of illuminating as to what's actually going on. So let's see.
Thanks very much, James. Thank you all very much for dialing in. I mean, as you see, events are happening in real time, as we were just saying earlier on. It really is momentous times indeed. We'll do a bonus episode if necessary, of course. But until tomorrow, for now, all the very best from us here in London, in Berlin and in Brussels. Ukraine the Latest is an original podcast from The Telegraph, created by David Knowles. To support our work and stay on top of all of our Ukraine news, analysis and dispatches from the ground, please subscribe to The Telegraph. You can get 1 month free, then 2 months for just £1 at www.telegraph.co.uk/Ukraine the Latest. Deploying cutting-edge technology, we also release Ukrainian and Russian versions of this podcast. These translations retain our voices and delivery so that it can reach listeners in every region of Ukraine and those parts of Eastern Europe where Russian is still widely spoken. Links to those can be found in the podcast description to this episode. You can also now sign up to the new Ukraine the Latest weekly newsletter. Each week, Dom Nicholls and I answer your questions, provide recommended reading, and give exclusive analysis and behind-the-scenes insights, plus maps of the front lines and diagrams of weapons to complement our daily reporting. It's free for everyone, including non-subscribers. You can find the link to sign up in the descriptions for this episode. We regularly have a Ukraine Live blog on our website, where you can follow updates as they come in throughout the day, including insights from regular contributors to this podcast. We also do the same for other breaking international stories. If you appreciate our work, please consider following Ukraine the Latest on your preferred podcast app and leave us a review, as it really helps others find the show. Please also share it with those who may not be aware we exist. You can listen to this conversation live at 1 p.m. London time each weekday on X Spaces. Follow The Telegraph so that you don't miss it. You can also get in touch directly to ask questions or give comments by emailing ukrainepod@telegraph.co.uk. We continue to read every message. You can also contact us directly on X. You'll find our handles in the description for this episode. As ever, we're especially interested to hear where you're listening from around the world. Ukraine the Latest was today produced by Phil Atkins. Executive producers are Francis Dearnley, Louisa Wells, and David Knowles.
My name is David Knowles. Thank you all for listening. Goodbye.